Welcome to NTD Evening News. Our top story tonight, chaos in South Korea after the president imposed martial law. He's now lifting the order after protests erupted near parliament. Ariane Pasdar has the update. The U.S. vowing ironclad ties with Seoul while expressing grave concerns how the surprising developments in the key U.S. ally could impact security posture in the Indo-Pacific. Touts explains. President Biden pledges long-lasting support for Africa during his visit to Angola, a trip that's meant to counter China's influence on the continent. The highlights from the president's remarks. President-elect Trump asked the judge in his New York criminal case to toss his conviction. What the pardoning of Hunter Biden has to do with this latest move. Jack Bradley reports from West Palm Beach, Florida.
This is NTD Evening News. Live from our global headquarters in New York City, here's Tiffany Meyer.
Good evening and thank you for joining us tonight. Chaos in South Korea today. The country's president is now lifting martial law, which he imposed hours earlier. The president accuses the opposition of being influenced by North Korean communists. Protesters taking to the streets as disorder erupted near parliament. NTD's international correspondent Ariane Pasdar has the story.
Protests erupted in South Korea on Tuesday. Soldiers entered the parliament after the nation's president declared martial law.
To defend the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean communist forces.
President Yoon accuses the opposition of being influenced by North Korea's communist regime. He says they paralyzed the judiciary and executive branches. That's by allegedly intimidating judges and impeaching prosecutors and other officials. But the opposition is in control of the country's parliament. This means that it has the power to overturn martial law declarations, which it did shortly after the president imposed it.
The president should immediately lift the emergency martial law following the voting by the National Assembly. Now the martial law declaration is now invalid.
President Yoon complied with the demands shortly after, as even people from within his own party advised him to change course.
I will accept the National Assembly's demand and lift martial law through a cabinet meeting.
But tensions remained high throughout Tuesday. Some people blocked a military vehicle as it tried to leave the area near Korea's parliament. Police also scuffled with protesters who support the opposition. Tuesday was the first time since 1980 that martial law was declared in South Korea. Back then, the country was not yet a democracy. The surprise move sent shockwaves across South Korea. The Korean currency was down sharply against the dollar. Ariane Pasdar, NTD News.
The White House is closely monitoring the situation in South Korea after the president of the close U.S. ally suddenly declared a martial law. The Pentagon says there are no force posture changes for the nearly 30,000 American troops stationed in the country. NTD's White House correspondent Touts has more.
The Biden administration is in contact with the South Korean government and is monitoring the situation on the ground closely as it works to learn more. That's according to the White House National Security Council, which asked that the U.S. was not given a heads up before President Yoon suddenly declared martial law. President Biden getting briefed on it while in Angola.
Just getting briefed.
The State Department saying the U.S. is watching developments there with grave concerns. But officials also stress the U.S. alliance with South Korea remains ironclad.
Our alliance with the Republic of Korea is ironclad, and we're fully committed to that. Open expectation is that any political disputes will be resolved peacefully and in accordance with the rule of law.
Potential instability in South Korea could impact the U.S. geopolitically. Nearly 30,000 American troops are stationed there, though the Pentagon on Tuesday saying there's been no change to its posture.
It's closely monitoring developments.
South Korea also stands as a beacon of democracy in a region where countries like Communist China and North Korea pose threats. President Biden has sought to strengthen ties with a Democratic ally, hosting President Yoon for a state dinner at the White House in 2023. And just last month, Biden and Yoon signed a new security agreement between the two countries.
I truly believe cooperation of our countries will be the foundation to peace and stability in the Indo-Pacific.
And amid a presidential transition in the U.S., Yoon has also called President-elect Trump, vowing to safeguard freedom and peace and agreeing to meet in person soon. Meanwhile, reports have pointed to the Chinese Communist Party's efforts throughout the years to influence the South Korean government. China has also been ramping up its military activities around South Korea, raising alarms throughout the region. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
More international forces are getting involved in Syria's civil war. A group that was backed by the U.S. in the past is now aiding terrorists in the fight against Syria's government. NTD's international correspondent Arian Pazdar has the latest and a warning. This report includes footage some viewers may find disturbing.
New video shows a statue being toppled in the city of Aleppo on Tuesday. It's a statue of the brother of Syria's president, Bashar al-Assad. Violence is increasing in Syria's 13-year-old civil war after terrorists started an uprising last week, trying to overthrow the government. This video shows terrorists holding Aleppo's international airport. On Tuesday, they also reported the capture of 4 other nearby towns. Government forces, meanwhile, retook some territory they lost last week.
Multiple civilian casualties.
The United Nations on Tuesday saying it is concerned about the effect the fighting has on civilians. The UN says attacks from both sides result in civilian casualties.
We urge all parties to de-escalate, protect civilians, and allow vital aid to flow to those in need.
The fighting is currently spreading across northern Syria. The areas are shown in yellow and green. And just south of Syria lies Lebanon, where tensions between Israel and Hezbollah are rising again. Syria's government is being backed by Russia, Iran, Hezbollah, and other forces. And the uprising against the government was started by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or HTS, which is a US-designated terrorist organization. But they're now also being supported by the Syrian Democratic Forces, or SDF, which was backed by the United States in the past.
Our focus has been on working with the SDF as it relates to countering ISIS, and that continues to be our focus.
The U.S. has not taken a side in the latest uprising, saying it wants to see de-escalation and democratic elections in Syria. Arian Pazdar, NTD News.
Staying in the Middle East, the ceasefire between Israel and the Hezbollah terrorist group is in jeopardy. Both sides accuse each other of violations and have been trading limited attacks. Israeli forces carried out several new drone and artillery strikes in southern Lebanon earlier today, killing 1 person. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu vowed to keep striking with an iron fist against perceived Hezbollah violations of the truce. Israel's defense minister also promised to expand the war should the ceasefire fall apart. President-elect Donald Trump's attorneys are asking for the New York business records case to be dismissed. That's according to a court filing made public today. Judge Juan Merchan has postponed sentencing in this case indefinitely. Joining us live now from West Palm Beach, Florida, is NTD's Jack Bradley. Good evening, Jack. What is significant about this latest court filing?
Good evening, Tiffany. Well, what's significant here is President-elect Donald Trump is connecting this to President Biden's pardoning of his son Hunter. Now, in the pardon, President Biden wrote that his son was selectively and unfairly prosecuted. Now, Trump is connecting this, of course, saying that Trump's attorneys argue that this also applies to him. The filing reads, President Biden argued that raw politics has infected this process and it led to a miscarriage of justice. These comments amounted to an extraordinary condemnation of President Biden's own DOJ. Now, Trump was found guilty back in May of falsifying business records related to an alleged hush money payment to adult film actress Stormy Daniels prior to the 2016 election. But the judge, Juan Merchan, in this case, postponed this case indefinitely, and citing presidential immunity as well. And the DA in this case had not opposed that decision. Now, we'll have to wait and see if this case actually does get tossed. Tiffany?
And Jack, Trump's transition team is allowing the Justice Department to conduct background checks on his nominees. What will this allow Trump's team to do?
Well, this will allow them to access classified documents to oversee those government agencies so that they're better prepared to lead those agencies on day one. But it's also what lawmakers in the Senate especially want to see. They're conducting a Senate confirmation vote, and they will give them more access to information prior to making that vote on those nominees. Tiffany.
And Jack, President-elect Trump is also heading to Paris this weekend for the grand reopening of the Notre Dame Cathedral. Tell us about that.
All right, so he's heading to Paris on Saturday. This will be his first time out of the country since winning the election. Now, as far as the Notre Dame, this cathedral, this historic cathedral, burned down 5.5 years ago in a massive fire, severely damaging the roof and its surrounding areas. And the president also praised the president of France, Macron, saying that he did a great job in his efforts to ensure restoration. He said, quote, "Macron has done a wonderful job ensuring that the Notre Dame has been restored to its full level of glory, and even more so, it will be a very special day for all." Now, Paris police say that the grand opening will draw about 50 leaders from around the world to the event on Saturday. Tiffany.
All right, Jack, thanks for those updates. And we've just learned that Florida Sheriff Chad Chronister has withdrew from consideration as Trump's pick for administrator of the Federal Drug Enforcement Agency, or DEA. In a social media post, Chronister wrote that the nomination was, quote, "the honor of a lifetime," but that he plans to continue serving as sheriff of Hillsborough County. We turn now to our legal correspondent, Arlene Richards, who explains how Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy proposed to remove large groups of employees from the federal workforce.
Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy have an assignment: to reduce the size of the federal government. They say in a recent Wall Street Journal article that they will focus on 3 major kinds of reform: regulatory rescissions, administrative reductions, and cost savings. Let's focus on administrative reductions, or removing thousands of federal employees. Musk and Ramaswamy are planning a drastic reduction in federal regulations. If successful, a massive number of employees will be asked to leave as well. Their plan is to appoint individuals whose jobs will be to identify the least number of employees needed to perform mandated functions. They say the number of federal employees to cut should be at least proportionate to the number of federal regulations that are nullified. But they intend to treat those employees with respect by offering incentives for early retirement and voluntary severance payments. But can the president fire federal employees? One of the first executive orders President Biden signed in January 2021 was to provide stronger protections for federal civil service workers. The order revoked President Trump's Schedule F rule, which gave him the power to reclassify huge groups of career government employees, which made it easier to fire them. Trump intends to restore Schedule F after his inauguration. But Musk and Ramaswamy say federal law allows for something called a reduction in force. They say a reduction in force doesn't target specific employees, and it gives the president broad power to prescribe rules governing the competitive service. They say Trump can use his executive power to implement a number of rules, from large-scale firings to relocation of federal agencies out of the Washington, D.C. area.
Senator Chuck Schumer has been elected Democratic leader of Congress again in a unanimous vote within his caucus. He has been in the role since 2017. In a statement, Senator Schumer reiterated his commitment to securing bipartisan solutions and collaborating with his Republican colleagues while continuing to stand up for Democratic values. Schumer was elected along with the entire Democratic leadership team, also elected unanimously. Coming up, President Biden pledges long-lasting support for Africa during his visit. What he has to say to the president of Angola. Is a new trade war ramping up between Beijing and Washington. China says it is banning exports of some key high-tech materials to the U.S. School curriculum teaching the dangers of communism and similar government systems is slated for a House vote tomorrow. Jason Blair brings us an overview of the bill. And a House subcommittee concludes its 2-year investigation into the COVID-19 pandemic, how the Chinese Communist Party played a key role in the global outbreak, and what long-term impacts linger today. Melina Weisskopf brings us the key takeaways when we come back. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. President Joe Biden used the first visit to Angola by an American president to promote billions of dollars in investment. Today, the commander-in-chief described the history of the slave trade that once linked the two countries' economies at the nation's Slave Museum. NTD's Andrew Thomas has the latest.
President Joe Biden spoke at Angola's National Museum of Slavery today. He discussed the history of slave trafficking between the U.S. and the African nation.
We're gathered in a solemn location because to fully consider how far our two countries have come in our friendship, we have to remember how we began.
President Biden's trip to Angola was also meant to counter China's influence on the African continent by committing $3 billion for the Libido Corridor Railway redevelopment. The project will connect Zambia, Congo, and Angola. The corridor across southern Africa is meant to make it easier to move raw materials for export.
You seek investment. So the United States is expanding our relationship all across Africa, from assistance to aid, to investment to trade, moving from patrons to partners to help bridge the infrastructure gap.
The funding aims to advance the U.S. presence in a region rich in minerals, critical in batteries for electric vehicles and devices. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
China has banned exports of some key minerals to the U.S. It comes one day after Washington's export restrictions on China's chip sector. Here's more.
The U.S. launched yet another crackdown on China's semiconductor industry on Monday. It's the third such move in 3 years and curbs exports to 140 companies. Those targeted include chip equipment maker Naura Technology Group, as well as other Chinese market leaders. The export restrictions also take aim at shipments of advanced memory chips and more chip-making tools to China. The move is one of the Biden administration's last large-scale efforts to weaken China's ability to access and produce chips. It comes just weeks before the swearing-in of President-elect Donald Trump. He is expected to retain many of Biden's tough-on-China measures. Washington believes Beijing could use chips to advance AI for military applications and threaten U.S. national security. The latest package includes curbs on China-bound shipments of high-bandwidth memory chips, which are critical for high-end applications like AI training. Chinese companies facing new restrictions include nearly 24 semiconductor companies. 2 investment companies and over 100 chip-making toolmakers also face being hit. Some of the impacted firms work with China's Huawei Technologies. The tech giant has faced US sanctions for years and is now at the center of China's advanced chip production and development. Beijing argued the US move undermined the international economic trade order and disrupted global supply chains. It further said China will take measures to safeguard the rights and interests of its firms. On Tuesday, Beijing responded with export restrictions of its own. It said it would ban the export of dual-use items related to gallium, germanium, antimony and superhard materials to the US with immediate effect. China has stepped up its drive to become self-sufficient in the semiconductor sector in recent years, but it's still well behind chip industry leaders like Nvidia in AI chips and chip equipment maker ASML in the Netherlands.
Educating high school students on the dangers of communism and other totalitarian government systems is the goal of a bill making its way through Congress. The bill is currently up for debate by the Rules Committee. NTD correspondent Jason Blair has the details.
The crucial Communism Teaching Act is making its way through the federal legislative process, being heard by the Committee on Rules on Tuesday. The bill aims to make a federal high school civic curriculum that will have students learn that communism has led to the deaths of over 100 million victims worldwide, understand the dangers of communism and similar political ideologies, understand that 1.5 billion people still suffer under communism. The bill also wants to include a comparative discussion of certain political ideologies, including communism and totalitarianism, that conflict with the principles of freedom and democracy that are essential to the founding of the United States. Included in the curriculum would be interviews, recordings, and writings from people talking about their personal experiences living under the covered political systems or ideas. In April, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis signed a bill requiring teaching the dangers of communism, as well as communist history and tactics, including those used in the United States. Arizona also has a similar bill required in their education curriculum that was signed into law by the governor in 2022. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Jason Blair, NTD News.
After 2 years investigating the COVID-19 pandemic, the House Select Subcommittee released its findings. It details the impacts on the economy, children's education, and overall health, and notably the Chinese Communist Party's undeniable role in allowing the virus to spread across the world. NTD's Melina Weisskopf has the key highlights and what the report says about the Chinese regime's involvement.
This report dedicates several pages to the Chinese Communist Party's direct role in the spread of COVID-19 around the world, as well as the lack of accountability that allowed it.
A pandemic that took the lives of more than 7 million people. The main factor initiating the spread of COVID-19 around the globe was the Chinese Communist Party's blatant violation of international health regulations and the World Health Organization's lack of scrutiny. Even as the CCP expelled U.S. journalists and threatened jail time for citizens who dared to speak out about the pandemic, the WHO affirmed the information coming from CCP officials. A House report details this, stating, in fact, the regime consistently lied to the world by underreporting China's actual infection and death statistic. The WHO was misinformed, denied access to China, and was used as a cover for CCP's reckless actions. Under a regulation, countries should notify the WHO 24 hours after such illnesses emerge. The CCP instead waited 1 month before speaking up and then declared it was under control. But because of the WHO's lack of scrutiny, it waited to declare a public health emergency until 1,000 people had already died in 19 countries. Human-to-human transmission was also brushed off early on because the WHO cited an investigation by Chinese authorities. The WHO also ignored early warnings from Taiwanese officials, instead giving the CCP more input into the issue. It agreed to the CCP's terms when conducting an investigation into COVID-19. These are only a few examples from the 500-page report, an investigation that the Chinese Communist Party tried to halt. Included in the report is an email sent to Chairman Winstrup by a CCP embassy counselor, encouraging him to cancel the hearings on the matter. Now that the investigation is concluded, Chairman Winstrup urges the 119th Congress to continue to build on the work, stating there is more information to find and honest actions to be taken. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weisskopf, NTD News.
Nathan Hochman was sworn in today as Los Angeles County's 44th District Attorney, officially taking office after last month's election. Hochman defeated incumbent George Gascon, signaling a shift in leadership for the country's justice system.
That I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Discharge the duties about which I'm about to enter.
Bravo.
61-year-old Hochman was sworn in by former California Governor Arnold Schwarzenegger during a ceremony at the Hall of Justice in downtown L.A. Hochman, who campaigned on tougher crime policies, won the election with nearly 60% of the vote, getting over 1.9 million votes to Gascon's 1.3 million. Gascon conceded the race a day after Election Day. One of Hochman's first high-profile cases will be the Menendez brothers' bid for resentencing. A hearing in the case has been delayed until next month. Up next, developments in South Korea sent shockwaves throughout the world. A retired colonel and security policy analyst joins us to break down the situation. And Britain's prime minister says he won't choose between the U.S. and the EU as he seeks to strengthen ties with both sides. It follows calls for him to choose between America's free enterprise economic model or the European Union's more socialist approach. That and more after the break. Welcome back. If you're just joining us now, here are some of today's top headlines. President-elect Trump's lawyers asked a judge to throw out his New York criminal conviction They argued this is because of the extraordinary circumstances of Trump's impending return to the White House. The ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah is in jeopardy after the two sides accuse each other of violations. Israel carried out new strikes in southern Lebanon and threatened to expand the war if the truce collapses. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu also praised Trump's comments, warning of consequences if the hostages in Gaza are not released. President Biden pledged lasting U.S. engagement with Africa on Africa's own terms during a meeting with the president of Angola. As part of his visit to the continent, Biden also promised over $1 billion of new humanitarian support for Africans displaced by droughts. South Korean President Yoon lifted a surprise martial law declaration he had imposed just hours before after the parliament voted to block the decree. Analysts are calling it the country's biggest political crisis in decades. The martial law declaration in South Korea sent shockwaves throughout the world. Joining us now to discuss the unprecedented situation is retired Colonel Grant Newsham, Senior Fellow at the Center for Security Policy and Research Fellow at the Japan Forum for Strategic Studies. Grant, thank you so much for joining us. Good to see you again. To begin, President Yoon has lifted martial law hours after imposing it. Now, this seems to have come out of nowhere, catching the U.S. and South Koreans off guard. What's your view on the sudden about-face and why Yoon declared this in the first place?
Well, you would think we would get a little more for $90 billion a year in an intelligence budget, but it was a surprise, as you note. What happened is that after President Yoon declared martial law, his own party said, "No, we don't agree with you," or at least the top people in it did. Of course, the opposition didn't as well, and there was no real popular support for it. So the National Assembly was able to get together and meet, pass a resolution, like 180 to nothing, and opposing this. And thus, by law, President Yoon has to rescind the martial law order unless he wants to sort of ignore it. Also, it seemed like the military support for this was lukewarm. So this was really a surprise to a lot of people, of course, maybe just about everyone, that it was not much. As martial law goes, usually you have some good articulated excuse for it. Here, it seems that President Yoon just said, well, there's North Korean supporters in the opposition, and that's true. But he really didn't have a smoking gun that would get anybody's attention and say, yeah, we see there's a requirement for this. It really seems like a case of sort of shoot, ready, aim. Shoot, aim, ready. He just got everything wrong. And this is probably political suicide, I'm afraid, for President Yoon.
I want to get to that, but first, zooming in on one part, on that note of communist forces inside South Korea. South Korea is a democratic ally of the U.S. How big of a communist influence is in that country?
Well, actually, in the political class, particularly in the leftist side of the spectrum, there's immense support for North Korea and the PRC, as hard as that is to believe. But if you look closely at it, look at their own words of these people. And what you've got is, it's called the Jusapa. And these were people who were, in the 1980s, were student radicals. I mean, real radicals, like North Korea is good. We're going to create sort of a utopia in the blood of the capitalists, this kind of language that you used to hear. And a lot of them have not disavowed that. And so there is, surprisingly, as I said, a lot of sympathy, support for China and North Korea in the leftist side of the Korean spectrum. Even the last president, President Moon Jae-in, he was a Jusapa, and he was in many respects, as I said, sympathetic to China, to North Korea. And there's a huge strain of anti-Americanism, as I said, in this group. Does it reflect like widespread Korean thinking? Probably not. Most people don't want to have rule a government like North Korea's controlling them. And most of them do support the U.S.-South Korea military alliance. But I think we've seen what really a coterie of very committed, ruthless radicals can do, often taking a country where it doesn't want to go. And this is something that probably has been in the works for about 7-8 years at least. And you're sort of seeing a move by Korea's leftists to establish a one-party state effectively. And it has been playing out. Yoon came in, he just won the election by the skin of his teeth. there's some question about what you call it, the legitimacy of South Korean elections in recent years. And I think some of that criticism, in fact, a lot of it probably is well-founded. But really, they say the leftists do see one-party rule in their grasp. And you will notice that President Yoon, from the time he took office, he's been impeached something like 22 times. His top officials have been impeached. The National Assembly, which is dominated by the Democratic Party, the opposition, has done nothing to act as loyal opposition to try and cooperate in governing the country, but rather just an all-out effort to destroy Yoon. And this, as I said, is a part of some analysts would say is a move going back, maybe 7 years to try and, take control of the levers of national power and to make the position for Korean conservatives just untenable. And the last year and a half, last couple of years, since Yoon was elected, this really has been nothing but obstruction by the other side. So one wonders if President Yoon, just out of sheer frustration, declared martial law. But nonetheless, you can see from the results of it and him quickly rescinding the declaration that he didn't have much support for it. But it is, in some ways, sort of a more quiet, more hard to see effort to transform Korean society. And it puts the United States, of course, in a very difficult position.
Given the protests we saw today, Parliament's bipartisan vote to end the decree, and of course the leader of Yoon's own party urging him to explain his decision, if, we do see that leftist side gaining more and more control, what does that mean for U.S.-South Korea relations going forward, especially given the tensions we're seeing from North Korea and China in the region?
Well, it's not good, to put it mildly. And the United States is often assumed it's a very strong relationship we have with South Korea, and in some respects it is. Our thinking is, well, it was based on the bloodshed in the Korean War, our support for South Korea to become the world's 11th largest economy and really a thriving democracy, and that it's therefore a solid relationship. But as I said, within the leftist side of the Korean spectrum, there are people and influential people who do see America as the enemy, as the reason why the peninsula is still split. They see North Korea as a more egalitarian, equitable place, and they see the People's Republic of China as the better option. So we've tended to take for granted the strength of our relationship with South Korea, and it perhaps has not gotten the tending it deserves. And I would say a large part of that problem has been the inability or unwillingness of the American government's successive administrations, by and large, and our academic class and foreign policy class to understand the nature of the extreme leftists in the Korean political universe. We've just pretended it doesn't really amount to much, but in actual fact, if you do your homework and look at what these people say, what they have said, their political stances, and it is alarming to say the least. But I would note most South Koreans do support the U.S. relationship, and they don't like the idea of communist government. But then again, that doesn't always matter, say, when some committed people are operating.
Colonel Grant Newsham, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thanks for having me.
Britain's Prime Minister says he does not need to choose between the United States and the European Union. Rather, he seeks to build ties with both. It follows calls for him to choose amid suggestions that choosing America could result in a favorable UK-US trade deal. NTD's international correspondent Malcolm Hudson has the story from London.
British Prime Minister Keir Starmer has rejected the notion that he must choose between his allies in the United States and those in Europe. This as President-elect Trump is expected to impose tariffs on Europe and has expressed the desire to end the war in Ukraine on day one in office. Starmer is instead vowing to build bridges between both Europe and America.
The idea that we must choose between our allies, that somehow we're with either America or Europe, is plain wrong.
He praised Trump as gracious and promised to invest more deeply than ever into the transatlantic bond with the US, while also rebuilding ties with Europe in the post-Brexit era. Starmer appears to be planning tailored treaties with individual European nations. Top advisor to Trump, Stephen Moore, last month said the UK should align itself with America's free enterprise economic model rather than the EU's more socialist system. Moore said doing this would bring more willingness from the incoming administration to strike a trade deal with the UK. Starmer, for the first time, acknowledged the conflict in Ukraine could move towards a negotiated end to the war, while insisting the UK will back Ukraine for as long as it takes.
To put Ukraine in the strongest possible position for negotiations so that they can secure a just and lasting peace.
During the election campaign, Trump said he would talk to both Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin and aim to have the leaders speak to each other. Zelensky has in recent weeks suggested he is open to a possible ceasefire with Russia. Of note as well, Starmer has insisted his right to build links with China after years of a harder stance from the previous British governments. Trump is proposing a 60% tariff on China and will likely call upon Europe and Britain to follow suit. Now, how these two rather different approaches to China will ultimately develop and interact, well, that remains to be seen. Malcolm Hudson, NTD News, London.
Coming up, the world-renowned Shen Performing Arts Company is set to begin its 2025 global tour later this month with an exquisite all-new production. Fans and dignitaries around the world express their gratitude for the profound artistic experience and spiritual inspiration the performances provide. In baseball news, could a new innovative rule transform the game? Dave Martin joins us to explain the proposed golden at-bat proposal. And 'tis the season to be jolly. Lights and decorations are already lining neighborhoods and stores across the country. David Lamb takes us to Noel Valley in San Francisco after the break. Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. A world-renowned cultural phenomenon is set to captivate audiences once again this holiday season. Shen Performing Arts, known for its stunning blend of traditional Chinese dance, music, and breathtaking visuals, is about to kick off its highly anticipated 2025 global tour.
With an exquisite all-new production, the Shen Performing Arts Company is about to kick off its annual global tour just before Christmas. After nearly 2 decades of mesmerizing audiences with stunning dance, music, and visual effects, Shen is set to continue its mission in reviving traditional Chinese culture with its 2025 tour. With a unique fusion of history, spirituality, and artistry, the company's annual global performances are eagerly awaited by fans and dignitaries alike.
I find Shen absolutely magical, truly a miracle. I didn't expect the performance to be so colorful, so dazzling, and it blends classical and folk elements together. It's just amazing, almost miraculous.
The Shen Orchestra is fantastic, the best symphony orchestra I've ever heard. Their coordination was flawless, making a profound emotional impact. It was magnificent. As I've said, I recommend everyone to see Shen live. Only then can you truly feel the impact and awe that Shen brings.
Featuring lifelike backdrops, radiant costumes, and awe-inspiring dance and vocal performances, Shen brings Chinese historical stories, legends, and heroic contemporary tales to life through beautiful, pure artistry.
It's a wonderful performance. It had so many vibrant colors. The dancers were wonderful. It was a testament to what China is and has been previous to communism.
The performance showcased Chinese history spanning 5,000 years. The legends and historical stories all showcase the goodness of human nature, inspiring everyone to do good. This is incredibly meaningful.
About salvation, the Creator, and show about tradition. Remember your tradition, and the Creator will always be with you.
I truly felt a divine connection. I nearly reached a transcendent state. Yes, I could feel the divine presence, and it felt amazing.
What we see is an exuberance of human beings, and I think when you see people at their best, performing at their best, culturally at their best, that is a thing which is fantastic for us all.
Starting this month, Shen Yun's 2025 tour will take to the stage across North America, Europe, and the Asia-Pacific region. Tickets are already selling fast. For more information and to secure your tickets, visit shenyun.com.
And now for your sports news, we're joined by NTD's Dave Martin. Dave, a lot going on, but let's start not in the NFL, but in the Major League Baseball, where Commissioner Rob Manfred discussed a proposed golden at-bat rule on a recent podcast. What was he referring to here?
Yeah, this proposed golden at-bat rule apparently would allow a team to pick one at-bat per game to insert their best player at the plate, even if it's not their turn to at-bat. And that's per an article in The Athletic. Now, to clarify, Manfred said this was in the conversation-only stage. So there really aren't any specifics to be discussed. Does the batter switch places in the lineup? Does he just get inserted in? Is this only in the late innings? It's way too early to say. I will say Manfred has made changes I never thought I'd see. He did the pitch clock rule, much needed improvement there. He did the limited the number of pickoff throws by a pitcher, which really made the stolen base attempt much more exciting, and it cut down on some of the more boring parts of the game. Now, the ghost runner on second base rule to start at extra innings, I'm not a fan of. Thank goodness we don't have that in the postseason. So Manfred has shown a willingness to take big chances. This golden at-bat rule, if it ever did come to the big leagues, would definitely be his biggest ever.
Well, looking at golf news, Tiger Woods said he has a long way to go before playing on the PGA Tour again. This after a September back surgery has delayed his return. Now, is he still hoping to play once a month on the tour?
Yeah, he didn't quite specify. Now, for this year, that was his goal, and he did that with the 4 majors and one other event early in the season. Now, he missed the cut at 3 of those 5 events, though. He did reveal that he had back pain last year that went all the way down his leg, hence the surgery. Of course, he's had multiple surgeries on his legs after that car accident in 2021. I mean, he's just got plenty of injuries going on with him. Going forward, the PNC Championship starts in 2 weeks. Now, this is an event he could possibly play. It would be played with his son, Charlie, who's actually a very good golfer, too, because he can use a golf cart at this event. He didn't really talk about that, though, so we're not sure. Now, from an outsider's perspective, he's made small improvements over the last few years, at least being able to play in more events. I think the thought or wish on everyone's mind is, will he ever return to being the player he once was? I think the writing is on the wall on that one, but he's still the player everyone wants to see on the golf course.
Well, tonight in college football, the committee will release their next-to-last playoff rankings. Now, with losses by Ohio State and Miami, what are you most interested to see here?
Yeah, where they rank those two will definitely be interesting, especially for Miami. They haven't played a team that's currently ranked, and they have 2 losses now. I don't know what they're going to do with them. Meanwhile, you have SEC teams like Alabama, Ole Miss, and South Carolina that have 3 losses, but against tougher schedules. I mean, there's 8 SEC teams ranked in the top 25. The ACC, where Miami is, has just 3. Ohio State, meanwhile, they're out of the Big Ten title picture, but I think they're a lock for the playoffs. I think there's 4 playoff locks in the Big Ten. Win or lose this weekend. That's Oregon, Penn State, Indiana, and Ohio State. I think the SEC has 2 locks, Texas and Georgia, no matter who loses this weekend. And Georgia, if they lost, that would be number 3, but their schedule has been so tough, I think you have to include them. So that's 6. Meanwhile, you've got Notre Dame, an 11-1 record. They're a lock. That's 7. Plus, you have Hoover wins the Big 12 and the Mountain West. There's 9. Now, the ACC title game is where it gets real interesting. If Clemson beats SMU, they're in as the 10th team, and then you have 2 more wild card spots left. Do you take those 2 lost ACC teams, Miami and SMU, or any of those 3 lost teams? Who knows? Now, if Clemson loses, they're obviously out. SMU is in, and there's 2 spots between Miami and those 3 lost SEC teams. So a lot to decide there. Thankfully, we still have 1 more week.
Shifting gears to NBA action, tonight we have a matchup between the teams with the best and worst records in the league. That's Cleveland versus Washington. Washington has struggled in recent years. What's been the reaction to Cleveland's success?
Well, for one thing, Cleveland head coach Kenny Atkinson, he's got to be the early frontrunner for Coach of the Year. I mean, he was installed as a new coach this summer, and it's not like the team went out and made wholesale changes to their roster. In fact, they're without Max Strus still, who started 70 games for them last year. But right now, they've got the best offense in the league. They score the most points, they shoot the best percentages, both in field goals as well as 3-pointers. So they're the heavy favorites tonight. In tonight's NBA games, points count toward the NBA Cup standings. Now, they're at the end of the group stage now. 8 teams will advance to the knockout rounds. Winner will be crowned on December 17 in Las Vegas, so stay tuned for that.
All right, well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Well, thank you, Tiff.
One way to celebrate Christmas is to decorate. We look at one community in San Francisco that's trying to get shoppers in stores with its decor. NTD's David Lamb reports.
'Tis the season to be jolly. San Francisco's No Valley is now called Knoll Valley until Christmas. Some shops have decked their halls with boughs of holly, particularly on 24th Street. It's a window and parklet decoration contest.
The businesses around here looks very nice, very attractive, more inviting to come and spend time with your family. This is a neighborhood that is climbed to families.
The No Valley Merchants and Professionals Association is organizing the event, among others. It will award prizes in the categories of most elaborate, funniest, and most San Francisco. One goal of the festive decorations is to attract people to shop in stores instead of online.
What we know is that they like to see the actual ornament, because when they buy it online and then when they get, the product, they don't like it. Sometimes it's not what the picture shows. So they come in here and they see that. And then for people that they want more of the traditional, glass ornaments, blown glass, these are very pretty. These are from Egypt.
No Valley is a charming community nestled in the city. Business owners and residents welcome Christmas and what it brings.
What does Christmas mean to you?
Happiness, joy. I love all the ornaments and colors, and it's very festive.
Christmas is a time to gather with the family, celebrate the people that we have around us, and share our good times and bad times.
In San Francisco, David Lamb, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.